Booktube, it's Becky from Becky Writes, this is Becky Reads, and this is my continuing series on how and why we read. I want to put out that disclaimer again that I am not a professional statistician, I am not a member of the publishing community, I am just an amateur culling things from the internet and adding in my own personal musings on how and why we read. So the Pew Research Institute every year does surveys of American reading habits, and I have some information from the 2016 survey, which was done last September, on how Americans are reading. And some of it is actually pretty encouraging. People keep saying that reading is dead and Americans don't read, and that's not exactly true. Pew found that 73% of Americans have read at least one book in the last year, and 65% of those read a print book. 28% of folks who read a book in the last year read an ebook, and 14% of people who read a book last year read an audiobook. One of the things I found was interesting about that data is of the 28% of Americans who read an ebook of some kind last year, the number of Americans who used their cell phones tripled between 2015 to 2016. Now, I didn't find the actual data numbers of percentages of cell phone reading versus like tablet reading. I think they're in the Pew report, which I will link down below. But the number of people who are reading on cell phones has tripled, and using your cell phone as an e-reader device has particularly grown among African American and Hispanic Latino populations, which makes a lot of sense to me since those communities tend to face higher rates of poverty, and people in poverty don't go out and buy a Kindle and don't go out and buy a Nook, but they may have a smartphone and through a smartphone be able to read a book while they're waiting for the bus, or while they're waiting to get their hair done, or while they're, at a doctor's office visit. That is one place where ebooks can be reached to a population that may not have the disposable income to buy particular dedicated e-readers. They've also seen a rise in use of people reading ebooks on their tablets that they use for other things, like an iPad, where you might use an iPad for lots of things, like games, like keeping documents, whatever, but you also will have like the Kindle app downloaded and you read books through that. Americans on average read 12 books in a year, and women average 14 books a year while men average 9. Now that difference is statistically significant because it shows that the majority of readers in America and the majority of books read in America is women. And that is not surprising to me since women make up the majority of people in publishing, and women tend to be classified as sort of the brainy types, and so books are marketed towards women. The romance genre, for example, is like 90% women readers, and the romance genre is the biggest selling genre of books in America. You probably didn't know that. But it does mean that the whole crisis of men not reading is real. That 5-book difference on average is statistically significant. I would be really curious to look at those numbers among teenagers, among college-age folks, and among sort of older young adults, basically 24 to 35-year-olds, and to see how that looks in those younger age brackets. We know that the age range that reads the least is actually people ages like 50 to like 64. That age range reads the least, while the age range that reads the most is 18 to 29. Now, a lot of people attribute that 18 to 29 to things like assigned reading in college, but I would argue that that's not true. 80% of young adults ages 18 to 29 have read at least one book in the last year, and if you assume the majority of people don't go on to graduate school, which means they finish at age 22, that amount of books read between 18 and 22 is not enough to countermand all the books that are read between 23 and 29. So I think that you're seeing a rise in really strong readers among young adults, which is exciting to me, and I think is why you see BookTube full of young adults and YA literature in general. In 2016, 84% of responders said that they read for a specific interest. So there was a particular topic that they were interested in reading, and 84% of people read because of that particular topic. 82% of responders said they read to keep up with current events. 80% of responders said that they were reading specifically for pleasure, which is interesting that you see a drop, 80% reading for pleasure, the others reading for knowledge, and that there is a bit of a difference there. And 57% of responders said that they were reading something for work or school, which is a huge drop, which means that there are a statistically significant portion of Americans who are reading just because they want to, not because they have to. This does not go into whether or not that 57% of people who said they had to read for work or school were also reading for pleasure. I assume some of them definitely are, and how many books they were having to read for work versus how many books they were having to read for pleasure, but it gives you a bit of a snapshot. Lots of Americans have to read for school or work, but a not insignificant number of people are reading because they want to, and that's great. 40% of Americans said they read exclusively print-only books, and 6% of Americans said they read exclusively digital books. So what it showcases is that most Americans read a mixture of print and digital. I know that I certainly do. I read a lot of print books, but I listen to a lot of audiobooks. But it does show that print is still king. Print books are still the #1 choice among Americans of every age range, although older Americans in that 50+ range, they do have a strong affinity for ebooks. And I am guessing, one, they're easy to get, and two, you can really blow up ebooks. If you have a tablet or an e-reader, you can really make those words larger. And so I wonder if there is a correlation between the ability to have really large print on an e-reader at whatever rate you want, and the older you get, versus having physical books that you have to move, that are heavy, but also have a standard print size, and the lack of availability for large print. I would be really curious what those numbers are. I don't think we have them, but I am guesstimating, creating a correlation that perhaps older readers like ebooks in part because they can have that larger print size. I have a personal friend who's 50 who prefers ebooks for that reason, which got me thinking about it. That's why I make that guess. If you were surprised by any of this, the average American reading 12 books a year, women reading statistically significantly more books than men, that ebooks make up nearly a third of what people read in a year, and that audiobooks have been holding fast at that 14% rate. One of the things that's been really interesting about audiobooks is they haven't seen an increase in recent years. That 14% rate held from 2015, 2014 it was actually 12%, in 2013 it was back up to 14%. What I've heard from audiobook people is that basically nobody new has been gravitating to audiobooks, but if you're already in the audiobook game, you're reading more audiobooks. So they haven't seen an increase of readership, but they have seen audiobook readers reading more audiobooks, which I know is totally myself. I read way more audiobooks than I did 2 or 3 years ago, and I probably will continue to read a lot of audiobooks because they're just such time-efficient ways of being able to read books, and I love them. Comment down below and let me know if any of these findings surprised you. Were you surprised that the average American reads 12 books in a year? Does that encourage you or does that worry you? I find it encouraging because I have swallowed the narrative so many times that Americans don't read at all, and most Americans don't read a single book in a year, but the average American reads 12. Now I know readers like you and I who are reading multiple books in a month, sometimes up to 10 books a month for me, are skewing those numbers up, but I do think the average American probably does read between 10 and 12 books a year, and that's why you can have smash hits like The Da Vinci Code reaching people who may only read The Da Vinci Code and 2 or 3 other books in a whole year. That's not a bad thing. We have this romantic idea that there was a history in which people read constantly, but reading has always been something that's a privilege. Being able to own books, even now that books are relatively cheap, is a privilege. You have to have access to bookstores, which don't exist in lots and lots of places. You have to have access to disposable income in order to buy books, and you have to have access to disposable time, which is hard. Screen media is absorbed in a very different way and makes your brain function in a very different way than print media is, and so I find it really encouraging that we still are averaging a book a month as a country, and I think that as long as we can maintain that, I think we're going to be in a good place. Comment down below with your thoughts. I want this to be an engaging conversation. How do you read? Do you read ebooks? Do you read audiobooks? What do you think about print? How do those numbers reflect for your life? Do you find those numbers encouraging? Do you find them worrying? And how are they going to shape the way you read going forward, and perhaps the way you rate and review books going forward? I hope you guys are all doing well. I hope you're enjoying this series, and I will talk to you very soon. Bye!